Noting the presence of a quorum, there are several procedural matters for us to take up today. So let's jump right in. The first is the commission must nominate and vote on the first agenda item. In the absence of a chair, the bylaws require the commission to elect a member to perform the functions of the chairman to start at each meeting. And with the understanding that the vice chairman is the likely person to be elected. Would anyone like to?
I got an idea. How about we nominate you?
Second the nomination.
Thank you.
Okay.
That's
a movement.
I've been nominated and it's been seconded. All in favor of that, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? No. Thank you. All right, thank you. Next, agenda item 2 is to elect a vice chairman for the commission. So this is something that we usually do every year. And so even though I was just elected to run this meeting, we now need to select a vice chairman for future meetings as well. So
Chairman, I would nominate you for that position as well.
thank you. Anyone want a second? It's been seconded. So all in favor of that motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Okay, it'd be my honor, and I'm glad to continue to serve in this role. Thank you very much. Okay, agenda item 3 is to elect 2 members to serve as the second and third members to the executive committee. So the vice chairman, I am one of those members, and we need a 3-person executive committee. The executive committee reviews and sets the agendas for upcoming meetings through the course of the year, and we do this on a monthly basis, usually the week before the open session. Commissioner Peter May and Commissioner Arrington Dixon currently serve as members and have indicated their willingness to continue to serve. Is there a motion to elect Peter May and Arrington Dixon to the executive committee? It's been moved.
Second?
Second. All in favor of that motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. And thank you, Peter and Arrington, for continuing to serve on the executive committee. It is a commitment, and we do appreciate it. Agenda item 4 is approval of the 2020 commission meeting schedule. You should have that at your desk. The meetings are typically the first Thursday of each month, except for January and July, when the meetings are held on the second Thursday to avoid the holidays. We also do not hold meetings in August. So is there a motion to adopt the 2020 commission meeting calendar?
So moved.
It's been moved. Second and seconded. All in favor of adopting the schedule, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. That's great. Thank you. Okay, so this is my opportunity to just have a moment to, on agenda item 5, to really thank everyone who participated in a very informative and outstanding training workshop that the commissioners and staff participated in yesterday. We really, there's so many of us who are new on the commission, and even those of us who are not new, it was really a beneficial kind of refresher on the responsibilities and the various authorities that we as commissioners have in carrying out our duties on the commission. So I first want to thank all my fellow commissioners for participating in this and your questions, your feedback, the discussion. It was really a fantastic event. It was in a tremendous venue. But I also want to thank a special thanks to the staff who worked very hard to pull the materials together. Thank you, Ms. Schuyler. Thank you, Ms. Sullivan. Thank you, Ms. Coster, and thank you, Marcel, for your leadership and conducting this not so easy review of the historical responsibilities and authorities, and also how we apply it in our monthly activities throughout this. So I really, really appreciate the benefit of having participated in it with all of you, and thank you for the hard work to pull it all together. Agenda item 6 is the report from the Executive Director, Mr. Acosta.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and congratulations on your dual appointments today. On Tuesday, September 24th at 6 p.m., Ncpc, in partnership with the American Society for Landscape Architects, will present Open to the Public, Rethinking Security and Access in Public Space. Our panel includes moderator Jess Zimbabwe of Plot Strategies, Susan Silverberg of Civic Moxie, Richard Klein, Deputy Director of the Federal Protective Service, and noted landscape architect Gary Hildebrand. The event will be held at the U.S. Navy Memorial's Burke Theater. And there's more information available on our website, and we hope you're able to attend that important session. NCPC will also host a joint NEPA Section 106 scoping meeting with the Federal Reserve on Tuesday, September 17th, 2 to 4 p.m. here at our offices. We'll provide information on Federal Reserve's proposal to renovate and expand their main building, the newly acquired East Building. The meeting is an open house format with a brief presentation beginning at 3 p.m. Information about this meeting and also the project is available on our website too. And the Federal Reserve will submit a master plan for these buildings later this year. So that's a very significant project that you'll be seeing this fall. 2 urban planners have recently joined the agency. We welcome Johanna McCrean. Johanna? Who's working on the update of the comprehensive plan on our commemoration studies. Joanna joins us from the Georgia Conservancy based in Atlanta. She's an architect and holds a Master of City and Regional Planning from the Georgia Institute of Technology. Garrett Wolf. Garrett has also joined NCPC and will work on our Monumental Course Streetscape, Pennsylvania Avenue, and Federal Triangle flood-proofing initiatives. Garrett is a landscape architect and geographer, a Fulbright Scholarship recipient, and is completing his doctorate in architecture at the University of Manchester. And finally, we say farewell to urban planner John Gerbich, who's headed to Atlanta to work with the National Park Service as its planning portfolio manager for the Southeast region. We thank John for his many contributions to our plan review division, and we wish him all the best in his new position and in his career. Thank you, John. And thanks to the Park Service.
Thanks. Well, you got him from us in the first place.
That's true.
Yes,
That's true.
yes.
So that concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, and welcome, Johanna and Aaron. Seems like you have pretty busy paths, and we're going to keep you busy in the present and the future as well, so welcome. Okay, agenda item 7 is the legislative update. So Ms. Schuyler, please enlighten us.
I will enlighten you, and I also thank Commissioner May, who frequently advises me of bills to which I need to pay attention. So the first is House of H.R. 3465. It's a bill to authorize the Fallen Journalists Memorial Foundation to establish a commemorative work in the district. As indicated by the title, the bill authorizes the Fallen Journalists Memorial Foundation to establish a commemorative work on eligible federal land in commemoration of the sacrifices made by journalists for a free and independent press. The bill was introduced in June, referred to the House Committee on Natural Resources, and subsequently the Subcommittee on National Parks, Forests, and Public Lands. The bill expressly states the requirements of the Commemorative Works Act shall apply, so you therefore will be playing a role in this. There is a companion bill in the Senate, the text of which is nearly identical to the House version, and that too has been referred to committee. The second bill is H.R. 3725, entitled The Civil War Defenses of Washington National Historic Park Act. Pursuant to this bill, the ring of fortifications in D.C., Maryland, and Northern Virginia, constructed at the beginning of the Civil War to protect the nation's capital, are designated a historic park, a national historic park. The bill was introduced in July and referred to the House Committee on Natural Resources.
Fascinating. Commissioner May.
Yeah, I just want to add the Fallen Journalists Memorial as well as another memorial proposal, the Every Word We Utter, I think, which you
Yes.
previously mentioned,
Yes.
will be the subject of a meeting of the National Capital Memorial Advisory Commission on September 24th at 1 p.m. at the offices of the Commission of Fine Arts. So,
Thank you.
I look forward to seeing everyone there. Well, some of you are definitely going to be there. Thank you.
Thank you. I also want to announce that the Secretary of Defense has informed me that he has designated the following commission alternates. Paul McMahon Jr., the Deputy Director, Facility Services Directorate, Washington Headquarters Services, and Thomas Muir, Director, Washington Headquarters Services, and Sajil Ahmed, Acting Director, Administration on Organization Policy. Welcome. Thank you. We're glad that all of you are going to be helping us in your commission duties here. Thank you. Okay, agenda item 8, the consent calendar items. So there are 4 items on the consent calendar. I'll read them now. Agenda item 8A is for Joint Base Andrews, moving the military working dogs kennels submitted by the Department of Defense. Agenda item 8B is the removal of a portion of Anacostia Avenue Northeast near the intersection of Eastern and Kenilworth Avenues Northeast from the permanent system of highways, square 5113, parcel 185-38, and lot 806, submitted by the District of Columbia Department of Consumer and Regulatory Affairs. Item 8C is for the creation of a multipurpose field at the Friendship Public Charter Schools Collegiate Academy, submitted by the District of Columbia Department of General Services. And item 8D is for construction of the Pentagon Control Tower and Fire Day Station, submitted by the Department of Defense. Is there a motion to approve the consent calendar?
So moved.
It's been moved. Second. All in favor of that motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Okay, let's move to agenda item 9, which is the consent calendar of action, action items, pardon me, action items, yes. Agenda item 9A, to approve comments on the concept plans for an independent power producer to install and operate solar power arrays at the Beltsville Agricultural Research Center. Mr. Weil, thank you for your presentation.
Thank you. Good afternoon, members of the Commission. The United States Department of Agriculture has submitted a proposal to install solar arrays at up to 60 sites throughout the Beltsville Agricultural Research Center campus for Commission review and comment. BARC has performed an environmental review of the potential sites through an environmental assessment to prepare for future bids from independent power producers, which will select from among the sites to design, install, maintain, and operate solar arrays for a 20-year period. BARC is undertaking this effort to meet a number of federal directives with a primary goal of generating a minimum of 7.5% of the campus's total annual energy needs from renewable sources. And this is consistent with the Ncpc Comprehensive Plan, which encourages federal properties to pursue energy conservation strategies at a multi-building or district level. This type of leasing arrangement is commonly undertaken through energy performance savings contracts, whereby federal agencies with readily developable land and requirements for greater use of sustainable energy are attractive to independent power providers as investment opportunities. In the case of this proposal, the Commission will issue a series of site selection and design guidelines to help manage this project early in its planning and development process. The Beltsville Agricultural Research Center, or BARC, encompasses 6,615 acres with agricultural fields, laboratories, office buildings, and unoccupied agricultural-related storage and equipment structures in northern Prince George's County, Maryland. The campus is situated near I-95, the Beltway, and Baltimore-Washington Parkway, adjacent to the suburban communities of Beltsville, College Park, and Greenbelt, Maryland, as well as federal property, which is a part of the Goddard Space Flight Center and Patuxent Wildlife Research Center. BARC is organized into 5 management areas, which are shown here as South Farm, North Farm, Linkage Farm, Central Farm, and East Farm. BARC's Beltsville Agricultural Research Center Historic District is centered around the campus's original research center area. The district is included in the Maryland Inventory of Historic Properties and has been determined eligible for listing in the National Register of Historic Places for its role as a national center of agricultural experimentation and testing. The campus is topographically varied with stands of forests, lower-lying flood areas, streams, small ponds, and rolling hills. The BARC campus is classified into 6 primary land use categories, with forested area situated primarily in the east, wetland area adjacent to Indian Creek extending east-west across the campus, and research fields in the western and far southeastern areas of the property. Potential future solar array installations are categorized into 3 different types: ground-mounted arrays, agricultural structure rooftop arrays, and parking canopy arrays. BARC previously considered rooftop sites on a number of occupied campus buildings, but dismissed these from further consideration based on technical and maintenance issues. Also, 7 sites were eliminated based on potential adverse impacts to the BARC Historic District as identified by the Maryland Historic Trust. In total, there are 21 potential in-ground sites, 10 agricultural building sites, and 29 parking lot canopy sites identified in the submission, for a total of 60 potential development sites. At this point, the number of array sites and their locations are unknown until a solar provider is selected, so BARC will submit preliminary and final development plans for each site to Ncpc for review once those site-specific plans are available. Also, not all of the potential sites will be selected, just the sites that are most favorable to solar generation with minimal development costs, close proximity to existing infrastructure, and other efficiency factors. Based on the current level of conceptual information provided in the BARC submission, which is illustrated here in the slide before you, Ncpc staff developed a set of recommended prioritization guidelines from the Commission by which BARC can use to help identify preferred development sites from a planning perspective, to try to minimize environmental impacts and preserve the campus's existing pastoral quality as much as possible. So starting with site prioritization on sites that have already been developed, here are the 39 sites that would locate arrays above surface parking and atop of agricultural related structures, clustered primarily in the North Farm, Linkage Farm, and Central Farm areas on BARC. To help preserve BARC's research mission, development sites should be prioritized on land that is identified as non-prime farmland over prime lands. The environmental assessment describes these designations as based on soil quality, permeability, acidity level, and sodium content. And here are the 18 potential sites that are designated as non-prime farmland, or areas that are more preferable for array development based on their inferior soil quality. Array sites outside of lower-lying flood-prone areas, either within the 100 or 500-year floodplains, should be selected over sites within flood-prone areas, since flood events may damage array equipment and or prevent operation and maintenance during those flooding periods. The project's environmental assessment shows a total of 7 sites within the 100 or 500-year floodplain, so while we are not definitively saying no at this point to these locations, based on our perspective, we are encouraging future prospective solar providers and BARC to prioritize land outside of these areas based on their potentially problematic conditions. And lastly, BARC should prioritize sites that would not require removal of any sizable areas of trees, and the submission materials show only 2 ground sites that would appear to require the removal of trees to allow development. As shown on the slide, one site is on the Linkage Farm area, and the other site is located on the East Farm. So here we're recommending consideration of the other 58 sites for development before the 2 sites that would require this tree removal. Based on the site prioritization guidelines, we have crafted language for the Commission to adopt that you'll see in the official Executive Director's recommendation at the end of my presentation. In addition to the previous guidelines, once specific array sites are selected by BARC and the future independent solar provider, the site should be designed as sensitively as possible to minimize view impacts from all off-campus locations and adjacent on-campus areas through several more site-specific guidelines which are displayed here on this slide. In particular, staff noticed a number of sites that are situated close to off-site residential and commercial development as shown in the submission. And these are labeled as installation areas 2 and 3. And these appear to have the most potential for off-campus view impacts. And so we're recommending the use of vegetative buffering around these sites should they be selected to hide array equipment as much as possible. This guidance was also provided by Prince George's County Planning staff as well, with specific suggestions to use native vegetation, ensure a minimum buffer yard width of 20 feet adjacent to residential properties, and planting per county vegetative density requirements. The last two site-specific guidelines shown here are to mitigate any tree removal based on our tree replacement policy, which is intended to prevent a net tree loss to the project area, as well as laying out array equipment in a manner to enable surrounding topography to preserve Bark's pastoral setting as much as possible. And similar to our selection guidelines, we will also include these more site-specific guidelines in our final recommendation. In general, all potential sites under consideration appear to be reasonable selections for solar array development based on the conceptual nature of the information provided through the EA document. Once an IPP is selected by BARC and specific sites are known with detailed development plans available, Ncpc may have further comments to provide to the applicant during our preliminary and final reviews of each site submission. So with that, the actual recommendation is shown here before you. We support the intent of the project to install solar arrays throughout the Beltsville Agricultural Research Center campus to meet various federal sustainability goals. We note that the project is consistent with federal environment the federal environment element policies, which encourage the federal government to pursue energy conservation strategies at a multi-building or district level. We note that the BARC has removed 7 previous potential in-ground sites that would have required removal of existing historic structures based on a determination by the Maryland Historic Trust. And we're recommending that BARC prioritize selection of future potential array development sites based on the following planning-related criteria. Developed sites over undeveloped sites, sites that are designed as not prime farmland over prime farmland areas, sites that are outside the 100 and 500-year floodplains, and sites that would not require any significant tree removal. In addition, we're also recommending that the Commission adopt several site-specific design strategies as follows. That landscaping should buffer sites that are situated near neighboring residential and commercial development with native vegetation planted per county guidelines related to density and species. That tree replacement should adhere to Ncpc comprehensive plan policies pertaining to tree removal, and arrays should be situated using the natural topography as much as possible to help preserve the campus setting. We find that all of the proposed sites can generally support solar arrays, but recommend that the applicant work to appropriately screen installations from any nearby residential uses, particularly in areas 2 and 3. We're noting that BARC will need to submit the site-specific development plans for each future array installation to Ncpc for review, as well as review by the Prince George's County Planning Department per Ncpc's referral process. And lastly, we're recommending that the U.S. Department of Agriculture update the BARC master plan to ensure that we have an appropriate planning tool by which to review future development on the campus. And with that, thank you. That concludes my presentation. We also have representation here from BARC, Mr. Sandy Morgan, who is also available for questions and comments from the Commission. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Whale. I really want to compliment the presentation and the analysis and the work's been done on this, because I feel like the staff has really sort of threaded the needle between preservation and environmental efficiency, and what a beautiful exemplar for that. And I'm quite familiar with this property. I've for the last 50 some years, I've sort of moved through the Agricultural Center in my comings and goings, and always enjoy the experience. And it sounds like we're going to do everything we can to try to continue to make it a beautiful place and an exemplar for the whole nation. So I'd like to open this up for any comment from the commission. Anyone have questions or comments? Sounds like everybody liked it. So is there a motion to approve the concept plan as indicated? Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Thank you very much. Get the rest of the afternoon off.
I was sort of wondering why it wasn't consent.
Okay, next is agenda item 9B for approval of the draft master plan for the Naval Support Facility Suitland as submitted by the Department of Navy. Mr. Weil, you don't get the afternoon off. You've got another one here, so thank you for that.
Thank you. Good afternoon again. The United States Department of the Navy has submitted a 20-year draft installation development plan for its Naval Support Facility Suitland installation in Prince George's County, Maryland. NSF Suitland is situated approximately 5 miles to the southeast of the U.S. Capitol building along the historic Suitland Parkway and Metro Rail's Green Line, adjacent to the Suitland Metro Station. The installation is a 42-acre fenced property under the control of the United States Department of the Navy, which is encompassed within a larger 226-acre federal enclave known as the Suitland Federal Center, and this is administered by the United States General Services Administration. Land for the Suitland Federal Center was originally acquired in 1941 as a receiving area for federal agencies with intended easy access to downtown Washington, D.C. Surrounding land uses and roadways adjacent to the Federal Center include the Washington National Cemetery to the west, Suitland Road and residential uses to the north, and Silver Hill Road with commercial and residential to the east. Federal Center employee access is provided through 6 different vehicular gates, with most visitors entering through Gate 5. The location shown in blue is an employee pedestrian bicycle only gate near the Metro Rail station to facilitate transit use by on-site workers. Inside the Federal Center, existing tenants include the Washington National Records Center, National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, U.S. Census Bureau, and NSF Suitland, which operates as a separate, secure installation within the larger Federal Center property. Thus, the Navy plans for the NSF Suitland property under a separate master plan or installation development plan outside of the larger Suitland Federal Center master plan. Here you can see a path that Navy employees can use between the pedestrian gate and NSF property situated along the southwest side of the U.S. Census building. The route measures 4,400 feet in length and is estimated at 20 minutes to walk between the Metro and the nearest NSF Suitland gate. The secure NSF Suitland property is dominated by a 600,000 square foot building known as Building 1 in the center of the site, which houses the 4,000 employee mission known as the Naval Maritime Intelligence Center, or NMIC. The other site features include recreational areas consisting of basketball courts, a recreational trail along the perimeter, picnic pavilions, and volleyball courts, utility areas which straddle the site's internal loop road, and a relatively sizable detention pond in the front of the property near Suitland's primary gate. Employee parking, shown here in pink, totals approximately 1,500 on-site spaces between 2 surface lots, on-street, loop road parking, and a 3-level garage. The Navy also leases 450 marked employee spaces from GSA across the street in a surface lot. A small lot, shown here in orange, contains 22 visitor spaces near the main gate. The proposed installation development plan is based on a 20-year planning horizon until 2040, with several key planning assumptions including on-site population will remain at its current level, the primary mission of NMIC will remain unchanged, and financial resources will continue to be constrained, requiring careful prioritization among competing Navy needs. The Navy formulated its future development plan based on a gap analysis of current facilities with 3 potential courses of action, or COAs, that represent 3 alternative planning scenarios. Of the 3 COAs, which include a minimalist scenario known as traditional, an ambitious, unconstrained, aggressive approach, the Navy selected the middle-of-the-road plan, or the progressive course of action, as a basis for its future development plan. In reviewing the draft Suitland Installation Development Plan, we looked at 3 key areas, including the proposed development within the installation, planning and design standards, and parking and transportation relative to the site. Starting with proposed development, notable future projects include a new 40,000 square foot addition to the east side of Building 1, a new visitor screening center, and a new employee garage. The main garage, which provides most of the employee parking capacity, must be fully removed from operation and demolished based on its extremely poor condition and resulting safety concerns over its continued use, with future construction of the new garage between 11 and 20 years from now. In the interim, the Navy has a plan to provide replacement parking for its employees with 2 new surface lots, one on-site and one off-site, and I'll discuss these more toward the end of my presentation. The other 2 projects are the new Building 1 addition and new visitor screening center. Regarding the building addition, we support its location based on the interior building configuration, space needs, and to preserve the recreational courts adjacent to the building's west wing. The location of the new visitor center is near NSF Suitland's primary gate to enable more efficient visitor processing, and we support the locations for both projects, which we will express in the final Executive Director's recommendation at the end of the presentation. The Suitland Installation Development Plan includes planning and design standards for parking, development sites, landscaping, signage, and streets. And these are based on the Department of Defense's 2012 United Facilities Criteria for Installation Master Planning Policies. The underlying DoD UFC policies are intended to meet sustainability and energy efficiency requirements, promote visual order and architectural consistency, enhance the natural and man-made environment, and improve functional aspects of DoD installations. And staff will note our support again for these standards as expressed through the NSF Suitland Plan in the final Executive Director's recommendation. Employee parking, shown here in pink, equates to a 1 to 2.1 ratio. For comparison, the Ncpc goal for the site is 1 to 3 based on Suitland's proximity to Metro Rail service. And this parking ratio requirement remains the same in the revised draft transportation element, which will be presented to you by Ncpc staff at the conclusion of my presentation. In planning for the future, the NSF Suitland TMP includes a number of goals for improving its non-single occupancy modes, with Metro Rail, ride-hailing, carpool vanpooling, walking, biking, and teleworking, resulting in a 23% increase in total non-single occupant vehicle use by the year 2040. In addition, the plan includes a number of travel demand management strategies, such as establishing a transit and bicycling advocacy group, hiring an employee transportation coordinator, constructing a shorter, more direct pedestrian path to the metro station, and producing regular TMP monitoring reports or memoranda to help the Navy work toward attaining future mode share goals. The plan does commit to Ncpc's overall long-term parking goal for the installation, which is 1 to 3, but does not show a clear path forward to reducing Suitland's parking supply. So we're going to request that the final installation development plan and TMP submission include defined action steps and interim targets with which to facilitate a gradual reduction in employee parking over time. This way, the travel demand management strategies that are proposed through the Navy TMP will be reinforced and afforded every opportunity to succeed. After demolition of the main parking garage, the Navy proposes to provide interim capacity for employees at its current 1 to 2.1 ratio, with construction of a new lot within the existing garage footprint and a new off-site lot on GSA property under a 10-year lease agreement with 2 potential 5-year extension options. Navy employees will use the lot on GSA property until a new garage is available for use on site. As shown on the slide, the new lot will be developed on the site of existing Navy leased parking, as well as land to the east, previously used as a development site and has since been cleared. As the land holding agency to the site, GSA will submit the project for Ncpc review as an interim use within the context of its 2002 master plan for the Suitland Federal Center. In support of the Navy's interim parking proposal, the Suitland TMP conveys that most NSF Suitland employees have to drive to work based on existing poor surrounding transit, pedestrian, and bicycle accessibility, the Suitland Metro station's end-of-the-line location, and an analysis of travel time differences between driving and using transit by Navy employees. However, more information is needed, such as spatial information that shows where Suitland employees live relative to public transportation, which the Navy can then use to propose an adjusted new lot size that better balances the need to accommodate current employee travel and working towards achieving their ambitious 1-to-3 goal. We will be requesting this adjusted lot size through our final Executive Director's recommendation at the end of my presentation. Finally, we're requesting some additional information in the final installation development plan to include identification of on-site areas where new tree planting should be prioritized, a more integrated property-wide stormwater management system with recommended bioswale areas, permeable paving, and other stormwater BMPs, as well as an exploration of whether the detention pond can be collectively replaced through potential stormwater site improvements. And lastly, responses to each Prince George's County Planning Department comment, which were received through our referral process. So with that, here is the final Executive Director's recommendation, and I'll highlight and paraphrase its key points based on my presentation. First, we're noting that the Navy property is situated within the larger Suitland Federal Center, which is under administration of the United States General Services Administration, as well as several key planning assumptions. We're recommending support for the installation development plans, guiding planning principles and design standards, as well as the siting decisions associated with the location of the new Building 1 addition and new visitor screening center. Regarding the submission's overall parking and transportation component, we note that NSF Suitland has an existing parking ratio of 1-to-2.1 with a long-term goal to attain a 1-to-3 ratio, which is consistent with NCPC's comprehensive plan policy. We note that the TMP includes future-specific goals for each of Suitland's non-SOV modes, which together result in a total 23% improvement in non-SOV use by 2040. We're requesting that the Navy commit to a more defined plan to achieve its 1-to-3 parking goal with action steps and intermittent parking reduction targets, beginning by proposing a smaller size for its new parking lot on GSA property. You will remember that the tentative capacity for that new lot is now currently at 650 spaces. We note that the future on-site employee garage to be constructed between 11 and 20 years from now should not cause overall employee parking to exceed the plan's 1-to-3 goal for the installation. And we're requesting that the Navy submit its future proposed TMP monitoring memoranda to Ncpc for review so that we can remain informed about the Navy's efforts to reduce its planned employee single occupant vehicle use. Regarding the Navy's interim off-site lot proposal, we're noting that the new lot is part of an interim solution to help replace employee parking capacity that will be lost with the required removal of NSF Suitland's main parking garage based on safety concerns, and that the interim parking plan will maintain Suitland's existing 1-to-2.1 ratio. However, given the Navy's commitment to attain a future 1-to-3 goal, they should make a good faith effort to improve their current ratio, starting with a smaller new leased lot size. And although the Navy has provided some travel time comparisons and other data to demonstrate why it would be difficult to meet a 1-to-3 ratio currently, we feel that more information is needed. Information that includes a more detailed analysis of where Suitland NMIC employees live relative to alternative transportation options. And based on this information, the Navy should propose an alternative new interim off-site lot size. We're noting that as the land holding agency, GSA will submit the lot for Ncpc review as an interim use relative to its 2002 master plan for the Suitland Federal Center. And we're also noting that the commission will not consider the GSA submission until after NCPC approves the final NSF Suitland Installation Development Plan and TMP, so that we can resolve these outstanding issues of reducing the size of the new off-site lot on GSA property, and also developing a more defined parking reduction strategy to be included in the final IDP submission. And finally, we're requesting that the final installation development plan include future tree planting areas, future tree planting priority areas, integrated stormwater management system with recommended BMP locations, and that the Navy respond to referral comments from the Prince George's County Planning Department. So with that, that concludes my presentation. We have representatives here from both NSF Suitland and the Navy Facilities Division, and who are also available to address any questions or comments that the Commission may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Weil. I would like to open it up for discussion. Any comments, questions? Commissioner May.
So is this facility something that is occupied 24/7 with a substantial number of employees, or is it, I mean, there are obviously going to be some, but
I believe the installation development plan does describe the building at Suitland as occupied 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
so, I mean, is it a third of the population of workers, or half of the population of workers, or?
Unfortunately, the TMP does not have that information.
Well, I think that's relevant when we start to think about numbers of parking spaces. So I think it would be helpful to know that information as well. You mentioned at some point a path, a new path to the metro.
Yes.
Can you talk more about what that would be? And I know that was something that was, I guess, in the TMP as something to explore?
Yeah, that was one of the strategies listed in the TMP.
Yeah.
I can't recall whether the TMP actually shows a path alignment. However, it does describe the path as being a more direct route rather than using the current path alongside the Census Bureau building up to Swan Road. So.
More direct going up to Swan Road?
No, I believe it would be more direct going
cutting
to the
across
NSF Suitland facility.
Cutting across the vegetated area there?
Yes, I believe that's correct.
Do you know anything about the nature of that vegetated area and how difficult that would be? I mean, is there a deep swale or anything like that that would
I
require
think there is
bridges
some relief to overcome, some topography to overcome there, as well as tree removal.
Okay, because, I mean, it's a, we might have more information coming to the dais, so.
As much fun as it is to watch you guys go back and forth.
Please introduce yourself.
So
Thank
I'm
you.
Lieutenant J.G. Meredith Renz, and I'm the Assistant Public Works Officer representing NSF Suitland. And so yes, we have talked about what it might look like to do a more direct path from the metro to our site to encourage people to use it. There is a little bit of an issue with grading, and of course, environmentally, some of that area is considered a wetland, so there would be a lot more studies we'd have to do to consider if that's viable beyond the actual security and sustainment aspects of a path like that.
So if it were a straight path, how long would it take to get to the facility? As opposed to the 20-minute estimated walk just to the gate?
I don't know. It's not a path I've walked directly because there is no
Sure.
path.
So, but I mean, you know, it wouldn't be that hard to kind of calculate what that distance would be and how long a trip that would be, because it seems to me that right now the way the path runs from the metro to the building is a real problem in terms of encouraging people to take the metro. Are there a lot, I mean, do we have any information on mode split? Do we know how many people are coming by metro now?
We do. I would have to consult the TMP to provide you numbers.
I believe it's 5 or 6%.
5 or 6%? Okay. Yeah, all right. Okay, thank you. So, I mean, it seems like it's a no-brainer to try to, as a way to encourage metro use. And it seems to me it would be a lot more sensible investment than tearing down a parking structure and building a new one. I mean, I understand it has to be replaced anyway, but it seems to me that that's, unless there really are extraordinary challenges in terms of terrain to overcome, wetlands, there are ways to build a trail through wetlands or across wetlands. It seems to me that much more attention should be focused on that kind of an effort. Is there a shuttle system right now to bring people to and from the metro?
No.
Is there any other kind of shuttle operated for the facility to bring people to other locations? No, not to other naval operations or anything like that. Have you looked at that as a way of encouraging metro as well?
It's something that we're considering.
Okay. And that's something that you've looked at as well in the information you've received?
Yes, it is a strategy included in the TMP.
Okay. All right. Well, I would encourage all of that. I mean, it seems to me that the shuttle is also a more immediate thing that could be undertaken. And I understand that there are, shuttles cost money. But it is a way to start reducing the numbers more significantly, more quickly. So I don't know that any of this makes me want to modify the EDR, but I'd like to hear what other commissioners have to say.
Anyone else have questions, comments? Commissioner Trueblood.
Thank you, and thank you for the presentation. I'll follow up with Commissioner May, just because generally I'm pretty discouraged by the parking ratio. And this, actually some of it will come up with the next presentation about the transportation element, but I wonder what the point of a ratio is if you can just say you can't hit it. And I mean, the metro is right there. It's right there, and it just, I'm just gonna. I don't know. That's not a question, but I guess there is a question. Well, no, I have another statement. So the transportation management plan, I appreciate. The way I look at those, I sort of personally rank infrastructure operational changes above everything else. I mean, it's easy to put up flyers and create clubs and, programs and all that, but what changes mode share are easier access to the metro, shuttles, bike changing facilities and bike storage facilities. So I thought I was surprised that kind of the infrastructure pieces that were in the TMP it was more about studying rather than implementing. Once again, I guess that's not a question. And I apologize. But I just think that's what concerns me. I think if we really are trying to address issues of transportation, issues of greenhouse gases, issues of congestion, then I think we have to think about what we need to change to get there, especially when we have an asset so close.
Thank you. Commissioner Cash. Oh, what would you like?
Sorry. My name is Nicole Tompkins-Flagg. I'm the Ncpc liaison for the Navy. I think a couple of things to keep in mind that we would like to provide more information in the next round of the IDP. But something to keep in mind is that the criteria for the 1-to-3 ratio does include a distance from the metro. And while the Suitland Federal Center itself is within the 2,000 feet of a metro rail, NSF Suitland is not. And as the presentation showed, the actual existing path in current conditions is well over 4,000 feet. That's twice the distance for the 1-to-3 requirement. And we are running up on a very hard deadline for when this garage needs to be demolished, in that it's literally falling down. And so while we completely agree that there are several other solutions that we want to look into in order to reach the 1-to-3 ratio in the future, we do need a temporary solution now. part of the garage has already been closed, so we are already operating under a deficit. And an additional level of the garage will need to be closed sometime within the next year. So we are running up on a hard deadline. We need an answer, and so what we're asking for at this point is to reach a solution for the time being so that we can continue to work through more permanent solutions in the future, which we would like to give more information on in the next iteration.
Can you just comment on the literally falling down part of it so we could understand it? Like, what is it a concrete building? No, mostly they don't fall down too easily. Just curious how that.
Yes, sir. Commander Jared Jasinski. I'm the Public Works Officer. Work with these fine patriots here. So literally falling down means we've got a panoply of pictures of actual chunks of concrete that have, because of the high calcium content of the concrete when it was installed, is basically during the freeze-thaw process is just falling. Is disconnecting from itself, disconnecting from the reinforcing bar in the concrete, and it is creating a dangerous situation for the folks that are parking in, and also creating a structural issue in its totality for the structure itself. So that is the urgency of this. Is we are going through quarterly structural engineer surveys that continue to say this is getting worse. You need to close portions now. We project close further portions in the coming months, and likely the entire garage in a year.
How old is the garage? Just,
2001,
wow,
the garage?
unfortunate.
The garage was built along the building in 1993.
Oh, excuse me.
Okay,
Still. So-
Should not be failing.
And,
yeah, yeah.
so given that part of it's closed, what's the effective parking ratio you're working with today? Or how many parking spaces are lost right now?
Can you come to the mic when you talk?
So how many spaces do I have right now within my own facility, or including what I've got leased from GSA at this moment?
Yep, everything.
Yes. So within the facility, probably have about 1,000 right now. And from GSA, I think we're probably at about 700, 750.
So you're down about what percentage?
So I have about 450 spaces that are closed
Okay.
already.
Okay.
And again, have borrowed some from GSA to make up for what we've had to close and to deal with the large population and the large amount of visitors that my site gets. This is, we can have up to 300 people for conferences in addition to the visitors who come every day to perform work, to train. So,
Okay.
and those are numbers that aren't reflected when we're talking about the ratio with you guys. So I've had to utilize every single spot that was a visitor spot just to keep up with what's happening with the structure.
Okay. Commissioner Cash.
Do you charge employees for parking, or is the parking free?
The parking is free.
Does GSA charge employees for parking? See?
Does GSA?
Does GSA charge employees for parking at, like, Census and the other facilities? Do you know off the top of your head?
Not more.
Okay.
I mean, it's unevenly applied, but so I can't, there's not an there's not an across-the-board policy. I know and it ebbs and flows. At one point, we were all paying for it, now we're not, so.
I mean, my concern is that you can, as Commissioner Trueblood said, you can start a lot of clubs and encourage people that how bad driving is and how fun the metro is, but I mean, the other probably most direct way to get your ratio in line is to eliminate parking spaces or create some kind of inducement to not drive your car there. I mean, it's right next to a metro station, and on top of that, I was just counting, there's about 6 bus lines that also serve the metro station. I mean, and plus there's a 2,000 space parking garage there at the metro station. So if people really need to drive their car that badly and they don't have free parking available to them, they can pay $5 a day to park in the metro station themselves. I think that there's so much volume of parking in this area already, and then just to add more and not kind of put people on a diet, you're never going to get people to stop driving if there's absolutely no incentive for them to ride the metro. In fact, it probably costs them more to ride metro. So I just think that in a case like this, where there's so much parking already, you're probably not going to get to your ratio through any kind of plan unless that plan includes reducing the number of parking spaces to get it to the ratio. So it's less of a question, it's more of a kind of, I guess, my 2 cents.
Commissioner Sajil.
So this is a 24/7 facility, right? So do you know how many folks work 24/7? I know, like at night.
That's not something I can comment on without talking to my tenant for security reasons.
Okay. Because I think one of the concerns also would be, I mean, we talk about the parking, we talk about, taking the metro itself, but depending on how many folks are working in that facility itself, on a 24/7 basis, the metro might not be available for some of the folks who need parking also. So I think that's something, I know the security reasons, I think overall, when you come back, we have to take a look at that too.
Actually, can I follow up on that point? How many employees are there total? I mean, like, within that 24 hours, how many people say, I work at this building at some point during the day?
Around 4,000.
Okay, and right now you have, you have over 1,000 parking spaces, you said, available right now. So even if it's like a third of the people, I mean, let all the people that work at night when Metro's not running, there should be a space for them, I would think. So I think that could be a concern, but I think that you still kind of overcome that hurdle.
Something to note is that we're not proposing to add any more parking to what currently exists. We're just asking for a reshuffling of what exists from a garage that needs to be removed to a surface lot on GSA property. The numbers would not increase in any way. It would be the same number of parking spaces.
I think just to state the obvious, but it's not helping us achieve the goal that has been established.
Agreed.
The other thing that just sort of troubling, and maybe I misread it or didn't understand it, the 20-year horizon. There's a 10-year lease, 2 5-year options, and the plan is for a 20-year. So I understand your current need. You have a building falling down. It's a safety issue. We need to stop the bleeding, if you will. But seems like a 20-year horizon is a long one for us to be buying into, for you not to committing to any of these interventions that we're discussing, including walkway pathways, buses, shuttles. I mean, it's extraordinary to have that metro station that close to your facility. It's sort of like candy that we're sitting here staring at, and we can't chew it. We can't eat it. And so, that's where these comments are coming from. And if you were to say to us, well, this is a 5-year plan and we're committing to something, I think that would help me in terms of this notion of permanence, because I don't know where any of us will be in 20 years, but it won't be here, probably. Maybe Arrington will still be here. But I think so that, please comment on that if you'd like.
Sure. So part of the longer range of that lease is for the time that it could potentially take to get the funding for a garage. I think you can probably handle that better than I can.
Yeah, so it's probably a surprise to no one, the resourcing and funding process is timely the way we knock that out. So a 5-year horizon would be potentially achievable, but from a realistic perspective of what's going on around the world and what the Navy is looking at as far as our infrastructure needs, my concern as the provider of facilities for my missions is we wouldn't be ready in time, and we'd be back in the same spot in 5 years.
Yeah, I think we're at a sort of a flex point in terms of the challenges between your reality and what we are sort of authorized to consider in terms of the Washington area environment. So I don't know, I think we're going to have to work really hard at that. It would help to convince us maybe if there were more identified proactive strategies that would mitigate the parking 20-year problem through these other possible reductions in need for parking. And I think one of the things that hasn't been brought up, but it's probably goes without saying, is that when we see the new 10-year leased GSA surface parking lot, we see a dramatic increase in imperviousness. And that is, again, signing on to a 20-year going in the wrong direction in terms of our mission and goals here. We want to support your mission and goals. We need to figure out how to do that in a collaborative way that I think everyone succeeds. You would get, I think, probably more support if you could commit to strategies that would demonstrate you're going to get us there sooner than 20 years, because I understand about the construction 20 years, but we all know that the direction of people driving single occupancy vehicles is headed in a downward direction. And you're asking somewhat for authority to continue at the same level you're at today. So it's not quite in keeping with what I would see even a 5-year, 10-year kind of horizon in terms of the demand for parking. And if we can figure out these other mitigations, that would, I think, help with the receptivity as you evolve your planning.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
it has been mentioned that there's metro parking. Do you know what their availability, if they were used to accommodate some of your needs, what's their utility? How much is it used, and is there enough, some extra space there that may be available, would be available there?
I don't have that answer. I can certainly look into it and get back with you on.
Yeah, I think that would be of
Yes, sir.
interest to me. And if they have to add some incentives to help people with paying for that parking or whatever you do, then you can get them parked there, but I think that's some data you ought.
Sir?
Sorry, I just want to make one other point that it actually, I'm going to put it on, I sit on the Regional Transportation Planning Board, and I know that WMATA is very interested in better utilizing its trains, its system. That is, they take a lot of people from the outside in, and they love options like this, which is bringing people out and better utilizing their trains and having fewer empty trains. There might be opportunities to collaborate with them on incentives or other things, and so I would encourage that to be a discussion.
One other quick thing on that is, with the addition of the Purple Line, this could also change things. I know it won't necessarily come directly to Suitland, but it could reduce the pathway and travel times associated with mass transit travel in the near future.
So, this has been a really interesting discussion, as it sometimes is, surprisingly. What I'm seeing here is that Ncpc has a certain standard, 1 to 3, that we would like you to be achieving, and your garage is falling apart and is telling you don't park here anymore, and the metro system loves installations like this that are at the end of the line, and society is changing and people don't want to drive as much, and people, of course, nobody ever wants to have a lot of traffic in their neighborhood either, but people don't want to drive as much. I know that my kids don't like having to drive places. Driving to work is not fun. They don't want to do it, and that is going to be the way people are in the future. So you're going to have trouble recruiting people to work here if they have to drive, they have to sit in traffic, et cetera. So all these things are pointing toward reducing the number of cars that can be parked there. And your response is, give us 20 years and a surface parking lot. It doesn't make sense. And I think that the transportation management for this has to be thought about more aggressively and be more focused on how do you get people there and not how do you get cars there. And I think that's really the overall message. You know, how it happens, whether it's a beautiful path through the woods and a bridge, or shuttle buses, or, you know, facilities that encourage other modes of transport, infrastructure, as Commissioner Trueblood suggested, those are the things that I think are going to be the most fruitful. And I understand that you may have to get some additional parking. But even that, there may be alternatives, such as the metro station. So I think those are the things that you really need to be looking at. So.
Just follow up on the metro thing. Yeah, I did look it up. So there's 1,900 spaces in that garage, and their website and right now it's highly available. I mean, just in the middle of a workday. So, I mean, 1,900 spaces is quite a bit, or even coming up with some kind of arrangement to lease some of those spaces from Metro just to set aside for your folks might be an alternative too, rather than building a lot more impervious surface.
Build a people movement.
Well, and it'll get them in practice for walking from the metro to the building, right?
And it's super healthy.
Yes.
So we're here to approve draft master plan comments. We have added comments. We hope that this feedback is going to be fruitful for you as you come back with the next round. And I don't know what's your timeline. What are you planning what would we see this coming back to
In
us?
terms of the final, I think they're planning on submitting for final at the December meeting, so in a couple of months.
Well, I'd say you have some work to do. We understand the urgency, and we don't want to hinder that, I would imagine. But this commission, I think, has spoken pretty clearly today, and I appreciate the comments. So with that, I'd like to see if there's a motion to approve the draft master plan with comments for the Naval Support Facility, Suitland.
So moved.
Is there a second? Second. All in favor? Pardon me, any
So
discussion?
I wonder if there's anything in here that we need to strengthen to make sure that we get
Yeah.
more, a final that's more responsive to the concerns that were expressed in our discussion. I don't know what that is. I mean, there's a lot of comments. So,
Possibly where we're talking about the 1-to-3 parking ratio goal over the next 20 years. That I think would we feel more comfort to look for achieving that sooner or as part of any solution going forward? Can you pull up the
Yeah.
EDR, please?
Sure.
you're talking about page 3 of the EDR,
Yes.
the first finding, as it
Fines.
were, fines.
Yeah.
So, you know, I would just strike out, make a good faith effort, and just say they should improve the current ratio with the interim parking project. I think that we assume that everyone will make a good faith effort when staff is working with applicants. But I think just to be a little bit more direct about what we would expect to see. I would hate to have the plan come back and then have it not approved because it's not sufficiently addressing the concerns of the commission.
Mr. Chairman,
Any discussion on that?
I would
Yes.
just say that my experience with the military is you take the hill, you don't make a good effort to take the hill. That's just what I was directed always on.
Commissioner Kay.
Following up on Commissioner May, I think that, yeah, just deleting the words "make a good faith effort to," and it should just read, "they should improve the current ratio."
Any further discussion on that?
So I would,
I would accept that as a friendly amendment. I made the motion, so.
yeah, I would suggest it as a friendly amendment. Is that sufficient for us to move ahead with the vote? Well, we'd have to have the second again,
There was a second
Yeah.
and you,
Second that.
amendment.
amendment?
Madam Secretary, could you please read the change to the note?
I'll just read that
Microphone.
There we go. Finds, under interim employee parking, finds that given the Navy's commitment to the 1-to-3 parking ratio goal over the next 20 years, they should improve the current ratio with the interim parking project. And that, so the motion to approve the draft master plan was made with that as an amendment.
I need to understand this. So with this edit that said, they should improve the current ratio with the interim parking project. So that means the GSA loaner lot is
And,
what we're saying.
and the 400 space surface lot on the
Well,
current.
I mean, so, but the ratio
It's both.
is for the
It's all of
entire,
it.
for the whole shoot and match. So in other words, then if this goes through, then the GSA loaned lot must decrease in size.
Or the 400 space on the
I mean, I'm just,
surface.
I
Well,
want
no,
to
not
make sure that I
necessarily.
get this, because I got to go back to work and deal with this.
I understand. I think that the objective is that the total number of parking spaces that would be available in the interim condition would meet a better ratio.
Right, so that's
Through whatever
that's why
means.
I'm
Now,
asking.
it doesn't necessarily mean that the size of the lot they need from you is going to go down, because they may need
They
to
may
take
decide
out
to take
more of
them
the
out
parking
somewhere else.
garage.
But so the comment will give the NIMIC some options in
Correct.
terms of where to pinch.
I think that's correct.
I mean, okay, I don't have any bragging rights to my math skills, but I think the way this is written, in effect, you could remove one parking space and change the ratio infinitesimally. So I just want to point that out because depending on what the goal, if you want to set, I think
Well,
that they need some more specificity in direction,
So
possibly.
do you want to suggest a specific ratio?
I'm-
1 to 2.5?
I'm simply saying that the way it's left,
Yeah.
it leaves a lot of murky stuff. And
Yeah.
speaking on your behalf, when there's murk,
Yeah.
it's really hard to negotiate with the people you're working for.
I think the thing that I'm struggling with is that I don't know enough to say what a better parking rate, a better achievable parking ratio is at this moment.
Well, what about setting some kind of aspirational goal? I mean, that's a goal that leaves
Yeah.
it in the land of ambiguity, but my point is the way, the way this reads, it makes a big
So,
rhetorical flourish, but doesn't have a whole lot of
Right.
anything to it.
fair enough. So we could find that they should improve. The short term is the 5-year term, right? Is that what we would call it? 5 years?
First of all, there's a 10-year lease, but this fines is about a 20-year period, right?
Well, no, I mean, this is about the interim parking
Well,
solution. Project, excuse me.
no, I don't think
This
so.
finding, yeah, it says improve the current ratio with the interim.
Yeah, but read this phrase before. Over the next 20 years, they should make a good
No,
faith effort to
It's
improve.
given that they are committing to get to that point.
Right,
The interim should be more aggressive than just 2.1.
right, 1.2. 1.
1.2.
1 to 2.1.
2.1,
Right.
right. Would it-
The,
You're wrong.
we have not executed the agreement yet.
Yeah. Would it, I mean, I hate just punting on stuff like this, but would it actually make sense to defer this to next month so that staff can work with Navy to find an achievable interim goal that's more aggressive than this?
We could do that. One of the things I was just going to say, and that we struggled with as staff and where we were asking for more information, is that we started to get some information with regard to where employees live and are located, a lot of whom seem to be living south of Metro and over to the east, which means they actually probably would take other forms of public transportation, they're not going to go into downtown or go to Summit Line and then come back. So we were struggling with trying to figure out what that number, show us that you can do better. Yes, improve your parking ratio now in trying to get to the 1 to 3. But we sort of combined it with give us more information and tell us what you can do because we don't have all the information yet. We were struggling with trying to find that number too. We could defer 1 month and work with the Navy, but we're going to do that anyway, whether you defer or not. So, I mean.
I understand, but since this is the last chance before we get to a
Right.
final in a couple of months, it might be worthwhile to understand better what the target is before we.
Why don't we come in with a revised, well, I guess that's, deferring. Come in with a revised draft with more information so we can feel good about setting a target.
So just to be clear, so rather than voting on an amendment to something that we would just defer all further action until we can learn more. Because I think what you're hearing is we don't know enough and we don't want to be irresponsible on your behalf. But at the same time, we need to know more. We could do it in executive session if you feel that this is a secure issue. We do that often. Be happy to entertain that if that's something you would help with providing this information.
Yeah, what's the impact of deferring 1 more month from your perspective?
It is just, it's pushing the project 1 month to the left, or to the right, sorry. So it's based on our expectation of the deterioration, there is a risk that we're going to be much better than 1 to 3 for some time if we don't figure this out. So it's just adding time on the end of that.
By default, you'll be much better.
By default.
So,
This is a good way to.
This is a what?
Yeah, but not in the way we would hope. Right. I think what you're hearing is I wouldn't necessarily see it the way you do, and I don't mean to tell you your business, you know it much better than I do, but we would anticipate you taking these efforts whether you were doing them with an approval of the CDR or not. And so by deferring, we would see you continuing to move down the path of working with staff and identifying a pathway to success here that's very much aligned with both of our mutual interests. So we hope that this doesn't cause undue delay in this project. We don't want to create an unsafe condition and put any individuals in peril. But at the same time, I don't think you're going to get the votes here today with what we know so far. Just reading the crowd. So we would offer the move to defer this, and we would be glad to welcome you back next month with more information, which could be in an executive session if you'd like.
Or Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I'm sorry, I should have asked this before, and I'm familiar with transportation management plans from sitting on the other side of the table, Peter. And one of the things that I was thinking about, and this is a little delayed, I'm sorry, were also employee incentives, not just, and I don't know if it's appropriate, but I think as we reconsider some of these things and we look at alternatives and we are trying to increase these ratios, I would encourage you also to look at ways in which you can incentivize employees not to drive.
Okay, with that, Madam Secretary,
Yes, I think the correct procedure would be first to withdraw the motion that has been made, and then you will need to vote on a deferral of the action, and if you would like to add any additional language to that, such as direct staff to work with the applicant to obtain more information and identify more detailed short-term strategies to achieve an improved current parking ratio. Is that, that's where we could,
So moved.
so let's first entertain a motion to withdraw the recommended language.
well, I think that would just be by the person who's.
I think if you table it, that does all of it at one time. I mean, it's gone. Okay, I move that we withdraw the motion that was offered,
To amend,
whatever the motion was.
to amend.
The motion to approve the EDR, because the amendment was already incorporated, right?
Incorporated as a friendly amendment.
And is there a second to that?
Second.
All in favor of withdrawing the friendly amendment, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed?
And
Okay.
that was actually the whole amendment and action together, right?
Yes.
Okay.
So everything's off the table, and now, would you like me to read?
Yes.
Defers action and directs staff to work with the applicant to obtain more information and identify more detailed short-term strategies to achieve an improved current parking ratio. So that, I think, leaves it open. Does that work?
I would say short-term parking ratio. I don't know if there's, yeah, approved short-term.
Maybe interim.
Well, they used, this is throughout, there's a short-term, a mid-term, and a long-term terminology in the EDR.
Yeah, but what we're talking about is a parking ratio that will last for the duration of the lease with the parking, and our terms are 10 plus 2 5-year options.
Okay.
So interim would suggest the period between now and whenever that changes, instead of short-term, which is, we define short-term very differently, don't we, than 10 years?
Well, I think this.
I'm not clear how we
EDR
can,
specifically talks about short-term.
Well, but it does sort of matter. Well, I mean, to be very clear about what we're talking about, that you're talking about revising for a ratio for the least lot, or the whole shoot and match for the duration of the GSA lease, which is 10 years plus 5 possibly.
Right, so all I'm commenting on is on page 5. Go ahead,
procedure.
Commissioner.
If we're gonna act on this, this discussion, it's gotta be acted on, which is basically dealing with it. If we're gonna delay it, we just need to table it and come back in a month.
Yeah. So you
All
could,
this discussion is either gotta be codified in some action or not. So we can't codify all these words and don't do anything.
Right.
So if we table it, the message is clear to
Saying
staff,
defer.
and we do it.
We don't need to wordsmith now.
How
That's
are
true.
we gonna vote on the wordsmith?
Okay,
Thank you, Arrington.
thank you
So
very
I'm
much.
just moving the table. I'm making them
Okay,
at a time certain, which really is not debatable, so.
Right.
We just vote up or down.
okay.
would anyone second Commissioner Dixon's motion to table? Second. All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Thank you. We have some work to do.
Yes. Can I ask one just procedural question? So we said the potential of deferring until next month. The deadline is tomorrow, so I don't think that works. is there?
Yeah, actually, it was last Friday, but we will,
Oh. Yeah, we had that
we'll
issue
figure
earlier.
it out.
Was that it?
We can figure it out. And I
Okay.
think instead of a whole new submittal, this will be presented more as an update with the
Okay.
information that we're missing.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Look forward to seeing you next month. All right, thank you, commissioners. Great work. Next, let's go to agenda item 9C, which is the authorization to release the draft transportation element update, including a technical addendum and updates to the submission guidelines, in order to have a 60-day public comment period. Mr. Hirsch? Sorry. Ms. Hirsch, pardon me.
Sorry.
Yes, of course.
Thank you, Arrington.
Good afternoon, members of the commission. Today I will be presenting the draft transportation element and submission guidelines update and requesting authorization to release the documents for a 60-day public comment period. The comprehensive plan guides planning and development in Washington, D.C. and the surrounding region. It includes two parts. The district elements prepared by the D.C. Office of Planning focuses on local planning issues. You will be hearing an information presentation on the district elements later this afternoon. Ncpc prepares the federal elements, which provide a policy framework for the federal government in managing its operations and property in the region. The transportation element was last updated in 2016. Similar to the federal workplace and the parks and open space element, the draft transportation element is organized around 4 new guiding principles, which allows staff to highlight regional transportation trends and plans. The update considered the findings of the National Capital Region Parking Study, which the Commission accepted in 2017. The Commission directed staff to consider the parking study findings in updating the element. I will review the parking study in more detail in a few moments. With the update to the transportation element, staff is proposing an addendum that explains the Commission's requirements for transportation management plans and transportation demand management. Staff is also proposing updates to the submission guidelines to correspond with the updated element. The updates to the guidelines describe the process by which applicants may request a deviation from parking policies for individual projects and outline when a transportation management plan is required. With hundreds of thousands of employees in the region and as the single largest owner and occupant of property in the region, the federal government has a vested interest in ensuring the transportation system is efficient and reliable. To that end, the revised goal of the transportation element is to support the development and maintenance of a multimodal transportation system that meets the needs of federal workers, residents, and visitors while improving regional mobility, transportation access, and environmental quality. In drafting the update to the element, staff reviewed the recent analysis of transportation trends in the region completed by the Transportation Planning Board. I should note that the TPB region is slightly larger than NCPC's region and that it includes Frederick and Charles counties. But to review some highlights of that data, people will continue to move to the region, which will result in housing and job growth. With respect to commuting data, there's a large difference in commute mode share across the region. In the regional core of Washington, D.C., Arlington County, and Alexandria, over 50% of work trips are made by bus or rail, and over 10% by walking or biking. The percentage of these modes dramatically declines in the inner suburbs of Montgomery, Prince George's, and Fairfax counties, and the outer suburbs, which includes Prince William, Loudoun, Frederick, and Charles counties, where the greatest percentage of work trips are made by single occupancy vehicles. In general, there has also been an increase in teleworking or alternate work schedules, particularly within the federal government. And all of this data helped inform the policy development and the organizational structure of the draft element. So the element is structured around 4 new guiding principles that speak to the federal government's role in advancing regional transportation goals and address the Commission's review authority and role in encouraging and promoting travel to federal facilities and destinations in a safe and efficient manner. I'll provide an overview of the first 3 guiding principles and the policy topics in each section. Many of the topics and policies in these sections reflect the existing transportation element, but have been edited for clarity and reorganized. The majority of my presentation will focus on the 4th principle. This section of the document takes into account the findings of the parking study and is the area where staff is proposing the most substantive changes from the 2016 element. So the first guiding principle is to advance an interconnected transportation system that meets regional planning goals and objectives. The objective of this section is to acknowledge the importance of regional plans, such as Visualize 2045, and the role of agency coordination to create and maintain a transportation system that meets both federal and local needs. Policies in this section speak to large infrastructure projects such as the expansion of the Metro Rail system, as well as how agencies can work together to be better prepared to respond to emergencies as well as extreme or changing conditions. This section also acknowledges the role the federal government plays in managing and maintaining its own transportation assets. The second guiding principle is integrate a range of equitable mobility options to improve transportation access throughout the region. Policies in this section acknowledge the importance of developing and maintaining a multimodal transportation system that improves connectivity and provides a range of transportation options and services. Policies recognize that cars are and will continue to be an important component of regional mobility. At the same time, policies support efforts to expand regional access to multimodal transportation solutions through the use of transit, carpooling, bicycling, and other forms of travel. A new section on transportation equity emphasizes the importance of expanding public transit service and planning transportation projects that improve access for all users. Policies in this section also note the role that emerging transportation modes, such as dockless scooters and bicycles, may play in improving connectivity, particularly in urban areas of the region. The third guiding principle is connect transportation and land use to encourage responsible development patterns. Policies in this section seek to promote transit-oriented development, particularly when citing federal facilities. By locating federal workplaces and destinations near transit, the federal government can reduce reliance on single-occupancy vehicles and encourage travel by public transportation or other modes. Within campuses, the federal government can minimize vehicle trips by designing facilities that incorporate park once and walk districts and ensuring adequate bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure is provided. The fourth guiding principle is to promote efficient and sustainable travel to federal destinations. Policies in this section are intended to encourage multimodal access and reduce demand for single-occupancy vehicles. The section includes policies on transportation management plans, workplace parking, and visitor parking. Policies in this section of the element consider the recommendations and findings of the parking study developed for Ncpc by the John Volpe National Transportation Systems Center. To review briefly, the parking study included three components: a literature review to assess industry best practices, an analysis of parking policies of local jurisdictions, and an assessment of current and predicted accessibility at federal facilities within the region. Using the Metropolitan Council of Governments regional travel demand model and data from approximately 20 federal facilities, the study team developed a tool to estimate parking needs based on future transportation accessibility. The parking study noted that Ncpc's approach to parking management, which was first adopted in the 1980s, made the agency a leader in sustainable transportation practices. The study recommended to continue to build on that history with three specific recommendations. First, the study noted that the Commission's parking policies could be more data-driven or more closely aligned with accessibility conditions in the region. Second, the study noted that Ncpc should consider adoption of a standardized process to request modifications or deviations from established parking policies. And finally, the study recommended that the Commission develop a routine monitoring process to measure agency progress towards meeting parking ratios and transportation goals. I will review each of these in more detail in staff's corresponding proposal in the draft transportation element. So regarding the first recommendation from Volpe to make the Commission's policies more data-driven, the study highlighted that in general, future transit accessibility aligns with Ncpc's current or the 2016 parking ratios, with the exception of the historic DC boundary, which is the area outlined in orange on this slide. This zone calls for one parking space per four employees. This map shows that the areas in blue, located at the center of the region and along metro lines, are generally more accessible than areas in the region that are depicted in green or yellow. The existing 1 to 4 zone does not account for the wide-ranging accessibility conditions in the area, and as a result, applicants have requested the Commission approve modified and more lenient parking ratios for federal facilities. In many cases, this is due to variable access to Metro Rail or inadequate facilities to provide multimodal access. Volpe recommended adjusting these parking ratios to reflect the existing and future accessibility throughout the region. So based on the parking study, staff is recommending modified parking ratios as reflected on this slide. These zones result in achievable parking ratios that remain aspirational but are also realistic and attainable. As noted on the slide, the parking ratios are also expressed as non-SOV mode share goals. Staff felt it was important to clearly articulate what the parking ratios mean for other modes of travel. The slide shows the proposed workplace parking policies in the downtown core and surrounding areas. The area within the regional core of the L'Enfant City, highlighted in yellow, would have a 1-to-5 parking ratio. Within the historic DC boundary, the areas outlined in blue represent the new 1-to-4 zone, as those are the transit-rich corridors, which generally means that they follow the metro rail lines. Everything else within the diamond, except for the regional core, would be a 1-to-3 zone, and then in the suburban areas beyond metro rail, the parking ratio would be 1-to-2. The second major recommendation from the parking study related to development of a standardized deviation process. As I have noted, the Commission has previously granted modified parking ratios, and while the new parking ratios will reduce the need for deviations, there will be some facilities that need to request relief from the parking policies. So in response to that recommendation, staff has developed a list of criteria to evaluate an applicant's request for a deviation. These criteria are located in the revised submission guidelines. In developing these criteria, staff reviewed Commission actions from previous transportation projects. The criteria take into account agency mission, the availability of multimodal access, bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure, planned or future transportation improvements, distance to transit, and commute times. Applicants will need to show how the facility meets one or more of these criteria when requesting a deviation. Staff will evaluate the information and provide a recommendation to the Commission for their consideration and final decision. In addition, deviations will only be considered for individual projects rather than at the master plan stage. Master plans are intended to be long-term documents that consider a 20-year planning horizon and establish a vision for a specific facility. With parking ratios that are better tied to accessibility data, staff believes the need for deviations will decrease. In addition, as master plans are visioning documents that should be aspirational, staff does not recommend the Commission grant exceptions from policies at the master plan stage. Volpe's third major recommendation was that Ncpc should consider developing a regular monitoring and reporting process to evaluate agencies' progress towards achieving goals established in their TMPs. Staff is proposing that the Commission require applicants to conduct monitoring and reporting of transportation metrics on a biennial basis. This would include an updated mode split for the facility, as well as other updates on select TDM strategies that the Commission identifies as being important to meeting larger transportation goals and those that influence travel behavior. For example, the Commission may request an applicant report back on implementation of a shuttle system. When the Commission accepted the parking study, it directed staff to consider non-employee related travel and parking policies such as those pertaining to visitors or students at federal facilities. Historically, the Commission's policies have only applied to employees and workplaces, but the region is one of the most visited in the country due to many of its cultural and natural attractions, including parks, museums, memorials, and other sites. There are also visitors to military installations for certain amenities, such as grocery stores or other shopping centers. While many visitor sites are located in downtown Washington, there are also sites throughout the region where the availability of transit may not be as reliable. Therefore, transportation needs, including parking at these locations, can vary from site to site. Staff is proposing a set of policies that encourage agencies to consult the guidance of local jurisdictions to determine the appropriate amount of parking, and also to consider a range of transportation strategies to enhance multimodal access and to assess and evaluate the need for parking before expanding parking facilities. In addition, the element notes that with the number of national attractions and special events, the demand for visitor parking can vary based on season, and that parking should not be designed to accommodate that peak demand, but rather the demand of a typical high visitation day. As I noted at the start of the presentation, staff is proposing an addendum with an update to the element. The purpose of the addendum is to support policies within the document and explain the Commission's requirements for TMPs and transportation demand management. Guidance on developing a TMP, including a proposed outline and suggested TDM strategies for federal facilities, are highlighted. With the update, staff is proposing the Commission modify when TMPs are required. Currently, the need for a TMP is tied to the number of employees at a federal facility. With the draft element, a TMP would be required if a project or plan would cause transportation impacts. This could be due to an increase in the number of employees, a change in use, or physical improvements. The level or complexity of the TMP would depend on the context intensity of anticipated impacts. For smaller sites or projects, the TMP may be relatively brief, while for larger or more complex plans, a more thorough analysis and program of TDM may be required. So in closing, as noted in the staff report, staff has shared a preliminary draft of the element with applicant agencies in a few local jurisdictions. Staff addressed many of these initial comments in the draft document and will further consider other comments during the public review period. Staff will also continue to coordinate with agencies and local jurisdictions throughout the comment period. In terms of next steps, following the Commission's authorization to release the draft element, we will have a 60-day public comment period and post a notice in the Federal Register. The draft element will be available online on Ncpc's website for review and comment. We will have an open house on October 7th where the public can learn more about the update and provide written comments. Following the public comment period, staff will consider the comments and revise the element before bringing a final draft in early 2020 for the Commission's review and comment for final adoption. So with that, it is the Executive Director's recommendation that the Commission
Signing on to
release of the draft transportation element, including the addendum, for a 60-day public comment period, and to authorize the release of the revisions to the submission guidelines for a 60-day public comment period. That concludes my presentation.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hirsch. This is quite a body of work. A quick question. How long have we been working on this?
So the Commission adopted the parking study in 2017. So staff has been working on what you're seeing before you today since that time. The parking study was undertaken between 2016 and 2017.
Thank you. All right, we have one person signed up to speak, Ms. Marian Dombrowski with the Anacostia Watershed Citizens Advisory Committee. Ms. Dombrowski, please step forward, and you have 5 minutes. I believe maybe you also have a slide presentation, or?
Yes.
Yes.
We changed our name to Community Advisory Committee.
Okay,
So, yeah, that was a couple of years ago. Okay.
thank you.
That's okay. Is it, okay. Okay. I can kind of get started.
Okay.
Thanks for the opportunity to share our concerns. My name's Marian Dombrowski. The Anacostia Watershed Community Advisory Committee, which I represent today, serves as the community arm of the Anacostia Watershed Restoration Partnership. Members include steward groups, nonprofit organizations, and professionals focused on water quality issues in the Anacostia Watershed. We are supported by several agencies within the three Anacostia jurisdictions. Could you play that one? Just so you're amused while I'm talking, I'm going to play that one. It'll be clear later why that's being played. The last commission meeting I attended discussed the Parks and Open Space Plan. At that time, I shared our concerns that the document did not acknowledge the central role of our rivers and streams to the development of our parklands and open spaces. Our two rivers are germane to our existence, define us geographically, and are now don't get distracted. Sorry. And are essential organizational elements in planning our urban environment. I'm talking about rivers. They embody our history and will determine our future resilience. So that was an item that was missing from the parks and open space that we were concerned about. Today, I'm here to talk about one that's missing from the transportation elements. We feel it understates the impact of this infrastructure on the natural environment. Land use and transportation plans must conserve, enhance, and integrate natural features into our built environment. We ask that this imperative be emphatically stated and expressed in this important document. A filtration plant, I don't know if I need to go through that. Basically, it's the importance of, and dwindling water supply. We're going to be relying on more local water supplies in the not too distant future. As our population grows and resources shrink, we'll become, we've made great progress towards reclaiming resources in the metro area. The Anacostia River will be swimmable within the next 10 years. The mayor designated as state conservation area in the heart of the city on lands constructed of dredge spoils. These islands regenerated themselves. It's just incredible. I don't know if you are familiar with those parts. We must do better than just sustaining the unacceptable state of our natural areas, and we cannot afford to lose any more of what remains. Green infrastructure must be integrated to the planning process, or must be integral to the planning and design process. In the stated goal, which you can read there, the last words are improving environmental quality. If you don't, environmental quality will be improved when environmental goals are specifically stated and measures are included to achieve them. In other words, they must be deliberately called out. So anyway, these 2 pages list some things that we'd like to have incorporated in this document before it goes out for review. We consider them just fundamental to having a good, there's a couple nitpicky ones. One is referencing the maglev by name is, we just, this is a planning document, and it doesn't seem like we should refer to a specific project. Anyway, I won't go through all those. Okay, so, sorry, okay. So, sorry, you just saw that one. This is the South Platte River. This park is the result of a process undertaken under the Urban Waters Federal Partnership. This should be a model of what we should be doing. And a lot of this is directed, obviously, because we're focused on the Anacostia Watershed, on a master plan for the Anacostia Watershed. Let's see, so that, and we feel it's consistent with, with the plans, okay, and then this is the area that we're specifically concerned about due to its importance as a recovering urban estuary. The river system north of the CSX bridge from Greenbelt Park south to Kingman Island is priority. Oh, shoot.
Please finish your
Okay.
last thoughts.
Oh, sorry. Let's see. And also, these communities are most vulnerable to flooding. We need to identify opportunities for large-scale restoration of the scale of the wetlands in Bladensburg. Okay. And then as far as trails go, we're destroying our natural areas with the way we're building them. Can't continue doing this. We need, the outreach process needs to be beefed up, and maintenance and operations must be considered. And then, oops, God, is that last? Oh, yeah. These are some of the examples of the integration of trails, of transportation, recreation, and restoration. And every project we do has to do that, every project in a natural area. Okay.
Thank you, Ms. Dombrowski. We appreciate you coming back and enlightening us on this awareness. We really appreciate it.
Okay.
I would just want to thank you for your work. The organization has been very special to me because I'm very happy. The Anacostia River means a lot to me. So I'm glad that we'll be able to swim soon in it. I did swim in it already, though. When my sailboat capsized about 5 years ago, I had to swim. But I survived it, so hopefully it'll get even better. Thank you for your work.
Okay.
Commissioner May.
I was hoping we could actually flip through some of those slides again a little bit more slowly, because
Sure.
there's more, it seems there was more information that was in the letter.
Okay,
that
do
we-
you, where do you
Just-
want me to go back to the beginning?
Yeah, the ones with the photos and the bullet points, I think, just,
Okay,
yeah,
This
probably
one?
there. From there
Okay.
forward, just slow enough
okay.
to read. I don't have any specific questions, I just want to be able to read it.
Okay.
That these are basically identifying,
Yeah.
opportunities for large-scale restoration projects. That has to be done before any other planning goes forward. And you know that project, don't you? It was a dump and landfill down in Bladensburg, and now it's an incredible wetland. It's just amazing how quickly it was able to regenerate. Oops.
That's the trail that runs through it there.
Right.
On the left?
Yeah, it's on the, well,
Yeah.
yeah, we're
Let's see it
looking
there.
south, it's on the east side of the wetlands.
Next.
Okay. I kind of zeroed.
Oh, go back, go
oh,
back.
Sorry, whoops. Okay, won't touch it. Then these are some of the practices. These were done during the construction of the Kenilworth to Bladensburg section of the trail. Yeah, I don't know if you want me to get into gory details, but believe me, it was gory.
I just wanted to see what these photos were, that's all.
I'm sorry.
Go
I
ahead.
just wanted to see what the photos were, so go ahead.
Oh, okay. Oops, I'm sorry. Every time I get near it.
Okay.
Yeah, part of the reason I put that up is because in the course of, I'm sorry, in the course of, like, we get involved in a lot of projects, you know, of course, a lot of our members are interested, and there was a open comment period that, I mean, long after the public meeting, more and more stakeholders were contacting us, like groups that had been, you know, involved, like the Sierra Club and Audubon naturalists that have invested, you know, 20, 30, 40 years in these natural areas, were not aware of these projects. So anyway, that's, you know, we really hope that that process, there's no real defined process that we've found for doing outreach, and we hope that that can be tightened up. And we realize that's not specifically part of the transportation plan, but, you know, we're also encouraging that these steps be taken when major routes are planned.
Okay.
Ready? Okay, now it's not ready.
Hold on, how does that
Oh,
go?
okay. Then just maintenance and operations, you know, we plant trees and a lot of the, I know that this slide is more fun to look at.
I think you've done the things
Yeah.
that I wanted to see. so
Oh, okay.
I'm
Sorry.
fine.
Okay,
I-
great.
I appreciate
Thank you,
that.
Peter.
Yep.
I'm glad
Sure.
we're interested.
Any comments or questions for? So we have in front of us the EDR to authorize release of the draft transportation element update for public comment. And so I'm asking if anyone would like to move for that to
I would
happen.
like to ask whether or not these items that have been presented to us are, what they can be considered during the process, I guess, during the public comment period.
Yes, I mean, the transportation element is one element of our comprehensive plan, so some of the topics that have been raised are addressed in other elements, but we will consider these through the public comment period
Very good.
before we bring the final.
So I make, so move, Mr. Chairman.
Move and second. Before we vote, I do think that relative to the last agenda item and this one, this is very timely that this is coming forward, and we appreciate that the commission is leading the way in terms of trying to raise the expectations for transportation in the region, and we see how important it is, so thank you for that. We've had a motion and a second. All in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Thank you, the motion carries. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Dombrowski. Okay. We now, I want to say that the public can view the updates on NCPC's website, and as noted, there will be a public meeting on October 7th regarding those updates. Let's move to agenda item 10, which is an information presentation.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes,
I think we would like to recognize the chairman of the city council who joined us.
I was just about ready to do that, but thank you for
In
that.
your hands.
Thank you so much. Welcome, Commissioner Phil Mendelson. We appreciate your presence here today and look forward to your comments. Today, the DC Office of Planning is providing our commission an update on the process and timeline of the Second Amendment cycle to the district's comprehensive plan. This will prepare us before the framework element is formally referred to our commission for review by the Council of the District of Columbia. We want to recognize Commissioner Phil Mendelson and thank him for joining the commission today. We also want to thank Commissioner Trueblood in advance for briefing our commission on this very important presentation. Now I'd like to introduce Ms. Angela DuPont to start us off.
Thank you. So good afternoon, members of the Commission. The DC Office of Planning will be providing you an information presentation for their Second Amendment cycle of their 2006 district elements. The Comprehensive Plan is a document that guides planning and development in Washington, D.C., and is comprised of two parts. The federal elements prepared by Ncpc, which provides a policy framework for the federal government in managing its operations and activities in the National Capital Region, and the district elements prepared by the DC Office of Planning, which addresses traditional city planning issues such as land use, economic development within Washington, D.C. The DC Office of Planning last updated our commission on the District Comprehensive Plan Amendment process back in July of 2016. And since that time, the amendment process has changed, with the framework element moving at a quicker pace than the remainder of the district elements. DC Office of Planning will provide us an update to prepare us before the framework element is formally referred to our commission for review by the Council of the District of Columbia. And note under the Planning Act, when we review the DC Comprehensive Plan, our commission will be responsible for weighing in on federal interest. I would like to introduce Commissioner Andrew Trueblood, the DC Office of Planning Director, who will provide us an overview of the Second Amendment cycle to the 2006 district elements.
Thank you. Thank you for that introduction. I was just reflecting, it's kind of exciting and interesting to be on the other side of the dais, of the podium, and I'm very excited to share with you the update of our comprehensive plan. As just mentioned, this is actually this is a fundamental part of the District of Columbia our work. It's in the Home Rule Act, as is the kind of bifurcated planning authority between the District of Columbia, or between the District of Columbia Mayor and Office of Planning and Ncpc. So this is an important element of what we do, but also of what the Commission does. We've sort of seen this, and in fact, as I was looking at this, I realized this is a document from the original 2006 plan. What the process was in 2004, the District of Columbia created a vision called a Vision for Growing an Inclusive City through a pretty deep stakeholder engagement, and then a plan was passed in 2006. And if you notice, if you look very carefully, under the federal elements, we actually, I think, have some names of older elements that may not even be there, so we will update that moving forward. But we have the federal element side, and then the district elements, which is what I'm discussing. Broadly, and I'll get into what the citywide and area elements are in a moment, But broadly, these seek to incorporate all of the planning efforts that have occurred and put them into one broad document that then is passed by the district council, and that is then reviewed by Ncpc for federal interest. And the two most important kind of statutory components of the comprehensive plan are two parts. One is it does affect zoning. While zoning in the district is independent, our zoning plans and actions cannot be inconsistent with the comprehensive plan. So that is a way for the mayor and the council to weigh in broadly on issues of zoning. And the second is our capital improvements plan, just as your federal elements influence your federal capital improvements program, so does our plan, our comprehensive plan. So there's a lot going on here. I'll just walk through the way that I see it. There are 25 elements and 2 maps. As mentioned before, there's the framework element, which is what I think of as a context element. It talks about the forces of change. It provides a number of land use definitions. It provides guiding principles. And there are 2 other context elements: introduction, which is sort of introductory, like I said, it's self-explanatory. And then there's implementation. And then as well, there are 12 citywide elements, and I'll talk about those in a second, as well as 10 area elements. This map, I don't know if you can see it particularly well, but the pink are how we define our areas, and the gray are how we define our wards, our political wards. One might ask why we use these pink planning areas versus the wards. Even though they're very similar, they're a little bit different. And the reason for that is that our wards are political boundaries, and they change every 10 years after the census. And so trying to create a document that lasts 20 years, and in this case, this document will last through 2 census redistrictings, we wanted to make sure to create areas that could last beyond that. It also gives us the opportunity to create areas that are similar in form or typology or issues. I'll get to the framework element in a minute, and I'm glad the chairman has joined us because I think he can also speak to that as well, given that it is before the council. But there are a couple of things, well, and I'll say this, the Ncpc will get the framework element and we'll talk about it. Where the federal interests I think are most implicated in the plan are actually through primarily the citywide elements. In looking through it, I would say urban design, historic preservation, and the parks, recreation, and open space elements will be critical, and there are a number of references to things like cooperative management agreements, to a number of the efforts that are underway with Ncpc, such as the Pennsylvania Avenue Initiative, Southwest Eco District. In addition, the Central Washington area is really, I think, the one that most is aligned with many of Ncpc's authorities, and you will see many areas of interest and overlap in Central Washington. Southwest Eco District is an example, but Southwest, L'Enfant, obviously the core. So I think those are areas that we think that there are a number of overlaps and a number of things that have happened. This plan was passed in 2006. There was a minor update in 2012. During that time, the Office of Planning received about 300 proposed amendments, and that was in 2011. It was passed in 2012, and that was a minor update. I believe that I hear that when this process was started about 3 years ago, it was somewhere between a minor and a major amendment process, but we got over 3,000 amendments, which I think kicked it into the major amendment process, and maybe even we've talked about should it have, almost, we're almost at the point of a rewrite. For those thinking back to 2006, the district was in a very different place. I don't think it was quite as financially, fiscally secure. The population had just begun rebounding, just a whole number of different issues faced. So we are doing a major update, and that is one of the reasons why the framework element was moved quicker. It was proposed amendment was sent to the council in January of 2018 in order to kind of set the frame for the rest of it, make sure we're going in the right direction. There was a very long hearing, the longest or the second longest hearing, I hear, went till 3 a.m. on a snowy March morning in 2018. And then in July of this year, the council had their first reading with a second reading upcoming. So that has been very helpful for us, that discussion, both in the public sphere around the public hearing, but also the council's discussion up to that first reading and ongoing has really helped guide some of the things that we're looking at moving forward. I would say if I were to try and summarize the big changes, I would sort of put them into three buckets. One is housing. The DC has always been an expensive place, but what we hear universally is that housing affordability, housing availability and opportunity is challenging, and I think many people feel like it is not going in the right direction. There are efforts in the framework element to address that, but certainly in the housing element and land use and other elements as well. Another one is I would say around equity writ large, but questions of racial equity, around how we make sure that our growth is shared broadly. It's interesting because many of those things are beyond the kind of scope of a document that's focused more on the physical environment, but there are a number of places where we added, where we were proposing to add new language. For example, social determinants of health is something that we're hoping to include in our community services and facilities. And then the final one is around resilience. Resilience is more than, we have an environmental protection element, but resilience is really more than that. And we'll be adding a crosswalk that talks about all the resilient policies and proposals and actions that are proposed in the document. And so there are a number of opportunities for us to update the language. I mean, resilience wasn't even really a term in 2006 that was used in this way, and we think there's a lot to learn and a lot that aligns with the work that Ncpc is doing. So that is kind of a broad overview of the content. One more thing. We have, these are what our stakeholders, especially in the development community, are very, very interested in. There's a generalized policy map which talks about a lot about corridors and land use change areas. It identifies federal areas. Here you can see Armed Forces Retirement Home. This is the current map, which was recognized in 2006 as the land use change area. And then the real driver and the one that the Zoning Commission and Peter get to think about is the future land use map. And that is meant to help guide zoning and zoning changes in the district. And it is it's an important document, and a lot of folks are looking at it. When we look at it, we're looking for opportunities to support transit-oriented development along corridors, and certainly that housing development, as I mentioned before. Okay, I talked a little bit about the timing of this. So we've done a lot. A couple things that's worth noting here is that I haven't said is that in May we did what we call a DC values launch. We realized it's because of the time it has taken for all of this that I think took longer than we had expected, that we wanted to re-engage the public. And while we didn't necessarily have details to talk to the public about, we also hadn't yet talked about high-level goals, values, principles. While the framework element does have guiding principles, we thought we could update those with values, because that is something that maybe has changed since 2006, but could be helpful as we think about our changes. I'll talk about the results or the preliminary results of that in a moment. But I will say, looking forward, we have the council approval of the framework element upcoming. After that, it will come to Ncpc for review for federal interests. We plan to release, unlike Ncpc, I'm sort of jealous because you do this rolling process. We are going to release all the remaining 24 elements and 2 maps for public review, hopefully in mid-October. And that will be a 60-day public review period. We'll be very focused in DC on getting feedback from our advisory neighborhood commissions, and we'll be giving them 90 days to provide us feedback. So that'll be through early January for them, but 60 days for the public. Obviously, it'll be a chance to also coordinate with Ncpc for any potential flags. We'll be doing public outreach during that time and make any edits in 2020 with submission to council for their review and approval, at which point it would come to Ncpc. I just really talk very briefly. We found kind of 8 high-level values that we thought would be interesting to hear from residents about. We did, as you can see, we did in-person community engagement games. We also had a survey. I think what came across is issues of equity, safety, and livability were the highest, and I think that speaks to some of the big changes I just mentioned around concerns about housing and housing accessibility, about resiliency and the long-term future of the city, and a long-term thriving city for everybody. Oh, there we go, livability, safety, and equity. This is just, we had events all over the city and heard from over 3,100 residents on these values. I guess I've sort of spoke about this, but this just highlights our approach moving forward with the remaining 24 elements and 2 maps, which we would hope to get to council sometime before the middle of 2020, sometimes before their summer recess, and then up to them to review. I think our goal is to do a relatively robust community outreach process here, so that we can we can help council move it forward. I think that was one of the challenges we saw before, as we maybe had the opportunity to do a little bit more community engagement prior to sending to council for the framework. So I think with that, I maybe will ask the chairman if you have any things to add just about the framework, or even the rest of the process moving forward.
Thank you. So, as Andrew said, the framework is now before the council, and that is our process with regard to the district elements to the comprehensive plan. Drafted by the Office of Planning, they have to be approved as an act by the council, and then part of the process is that it comes to this commission for review. And the review is one that can actually require changes from the district. And I hope that will not be necessary. The only element before us right now is the framework. It was introduced by the mayor, I am going to say, in January, February of 2018. We had a hearing on March 20th, 2018. Andrew's reminding me it was about a 13 or 18-hour hearing. A lot of comments. The bill was introduced, and I say bill, or I could say element to framework, received a lot of criticism for 2 reasons. Some of the criticism was that it was actually proposing changes that would make the plan less specific, more vague. And I think that was in response to a problem that we've had in the district, and that is a lot of legal appeals of zoning decisions, primarily PUD decisions. Mm-hmm. And the thinking, I believe, was that if the plan was more general, then there's less to be able to appeal in terms of argument that the zoning commission disregarded the direction of the plan. But this was criticized, and then there also was criticism that there was very little reference in the framework in the amendments to housing being a priority. There was also criticism at that time that there had not been enough opportunity for public comment. Now, I'm not saying that that was correct, and actually I think that because there was this very long hearing, and then the council has not moved so quickly that people were unable to comment afterwards, that the adequacy of the comment has been mitigated. And then, as Andrew described, there plans to be, the Office of Planning is planning a much more robust public comment process going forward. In June, I guess it was, we released a staff draft of changes to the bill as introduced, and then we were required to vote twice when it's legislation, so we voted July 9th, and the second vote is scheduled for September 17th. Where we are with the framework is we've made a number of changes, and those changes are to elevate housing as a priority. And it's interesting because what we are amending is a plan adopted in 2006 in which economic development was the priority. The city was coming out of the control board era, or had just come out of the control board era. We were still seeing with the census in 2000 that decade after decade population was declining. What could we do to regenerate in terms of development, in terms of economic activity, regenerate the city. And that was really the emphasis in 2006, or at least I think that is a fair way of reading the plan that we're now amending. And it actually says to me that maybe the plan shouldn't be a 20-year plan, it should be have a shorter duration, but we're not addressing that right now. We're just doing amendments. And so these amendments are really changing the tone of the plan from being about economic development to being about the need for much more housing. That's not the only priority, but it is a high priority. And I'm quoting from language that we have in the framework as adopted on first reading. The issues that we are dealing with, I would say that we're still struggling with in the framework, that we will have, we largely resolved, but not entirely, are concerns about whether the framework gives enough direction to the zoning commission to look at displacement as an issue. So again, it's related to housing. Equity, which Andrew spoke to. There even came up, and I think we've resolved it for the moment, whether we should look at what some other jurisdictions have done and eliminate single-family zoning. That's not where we are, but that is an issue. How do we get more housing? And I would say a dynamic that's at work in terms of the comments we're getting, and of course the district's process is, I would venture, different than with the federal elements, and that is it's much more political because it's the district elements are adopted by the legislative branch as an act of legislation. And so comments that we are getting, the dynamic that we're dealing with even within the council is whether the comprehensive plan should be requiring more or less community involvement or more or less flexibility that the zoning commission has in making its decisions. I touched on earlier the issue of appeals to the Court of Appeals, primarily of planned unit developments. We've been mindful of that. As I said, I think that was an impetus for how the legislation was originally drafted. I think where we are is that we've come up with language that maintains a lot of the specificity in the plan. I personally believe that a plan should be a plan. And, but that still, with the language that we have, suggests that one doesn't have to read the plan literally or the future land use map literally. And what comes to mind, and I might get in trouble by bringing up a specific, but the McMillan Reservoir site, which is a very large site and is not going to be entirely developed. There's a substantial amount of open space. There's also a concentration of some density at one end. So should this be reviewed in terms of, well, if the plan, the comprehensive plan says that the density should be, and I can't remember, moderate or medium, does that mean the entire site has to be that and none of it can exceed that? And so we have language in the framework with what the amendments that the council has made that suggest that you look at the entire site. It suggests that when you look at displacement, displacement's an issue, but the zoning commission doesn't have to look at displacement on a neighborhood level or a ward level, but more specific to the development site. So I think, and the feedback I've gotten suggests that my thinking is correct, that we have made some changes in the language so that it will reduce the what do I want to say, the sustainability of appeals. And I think that would be a good thing. So that's kind of where we are. The second vote is scheduled for September 17th, and then we look forward to 2020 when we get the rest of it. I'm sure you all look forward to it as well. Thank you.
Wow, thank you very much for the presentation. Any questions or comments on this robust body of work? Anyone? Well, thank you, Commissioner Mendelson. We appreciate you coming today and sharing your comments. And thank you, Commissioner Trueblood, for helping us find our way through what's obviously a dense amount of work. And we look forward to seeing this coming. When? Maybe in the spring? Is that what we're thinking? When will we?
The framework.
When will we?
It's adopted as an act, so it will be signed by the mayor, I would say in October, and then it has to come to NCPC, so I would
Oh,
expect
so-
that's November.
Does it go to the mayor before it comes to NCPC?
I may be wrong, but
Yeah, I think it follows a little bit of a unique path. I think it comes to NCPC and then they give comments back and the council can review that and then I think.
that may be, that we review if there are changes we need to make, and then it goes to the mayor. In any event, it's October, November, they could come here.
Great, okay. Well, we'll need plenty of time to spend on it, that's for sure. I mean, just to absorb it all.
Great reading.
I have you guys read every page when it all comes. It'll be about 1,000 pages.
Yeah, very important document. Thank you all for the work. I think this concludes today's open session, and if there's no further action, I will move to close the meeting. Thank you very much.